I think we'll try to get this started. I want Marshall to have plenty of time to share with us his memories of FCA. And I know some of you got to get back to work too today. I appreciate the ones that have come today. This is a difficult thing to know how many to plan for on this kind of a deal, but we have got plenty of food over there. I ordered food for Chuck and I talked about it. We finally come down to 70, and but that's all right. The ones that are here, the ones that should be here, and I appreciate you being here. You know, I think I wanted you to speak just a little bit about FCA, and this kind of like talking to the choir. I realize that most of you know the amount of influence that FCA has had on young people in the state of Oklahoma. I don't think there's any other organization that I'm aware of that has been as much as a positive and spiritual influence on the lives of young people of Oklahoma in the last 60 plus years than the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, unless it would be Falls Creek Baptist Assembly. That's only just in the summertime. I grew up in the Baptist church and went to OBU and didn't ever hear of FCA until I was a senior at OBU. When I was a senior at OBU in '62, I went to coach's clinic because I planned on coaching the next year. And when I registered for the clinic, there was a sign there that said, "Free breakfast, Fellowship of Christian Athletes." And I didn't have any money. Speaking of, I was married, but we hadn't got a check from her teaching until the fall, so we were pretty lean. And so I free breakfast, and I said, "Fellowship of Christian Athletes, I wonder what that is." And we did not have a chapter at OBU. But I went to that breakfast anyway, and that was my first contact with FCA. So the next year when I started coaching, we had an FCA chapter in Stigler. When I went there, we established one. They called heled. And that Christian Athlete magazine with Billy Kreischer on the front was one of the magazines we got at that time. I have reproduced some of the FCA material that I had in a box in my garage that I went and got. Some of it has gone to the wayside over the years, but every school, there were 7 different schools I had the opportunity to coach and teach in, and every school I was at, we had an FCA chapter. And when we came here in '76, Jim Koch and I and Mike Sperry formed a chapter here, and they still have a chapter here. And it's a good, strong chapter. We have 2 really outstanding young people that are working with that chapter here, Jordan and her husband, Brent Hodge, and they meet here occasionally, part of the time. They have their meetings here at the Sports Museum because of the place that we are at in our society today. It's much more difficult to have those kind of organizations meeting on our school grounds. And before long, it'll probably be not possible at all. But nevertheless, it has a very good positive influence on our state. The FCA has been a strong organization in Oklahoma because of basically 4 gentlemen and their wives that have committed themselves to this for years. Chuck Bowman and Betty, and Gary Lauer and Elaine, and John Odell, his wife, and his dad. You can't forget Faye Odell, because he was one of the pioneers too of this organization. But those men and their families have dedicated their lives to FCA in Oklahoma, and it's been a tremendous influence over the lives of many people. I was showing this around a year at Stigler after I got associated with FCA. I was able to get a hold of this record. So this record was either in the late 50s or early 60s, but this is the record under the master coach, and these are the speeches from the men that spoke at the FCA conference at Estes Park, probably in the late 50s. But I mean, there are some out. If you're old, These are outstanding athlete men. Branch Rickey, Don Moomaw, Frank Broyles, Don Taylor, Carl Erskine, Bob Feller, and Otto Graham, Rayford Johnson, Alvin Dark, so forth. But that's kind of hoard I am. I still got that. And
That's not hoarding, that's collecting.
My wife keeps telling me, when are you going to start getting rid of some of this stuff? What are we going to do with this stuff if something happens to you? But anyway, the other thing that the books that we're commemorating today and honoring the authors of are on the table today, and you're welcome to one. We have some more over here. If you want to make a donation, it'll go to the FCA here, the museum. We'll do something with it. We made a donation to the FCA here after our Tomlin Sorter breakfast, and that's going to go towards a scholarship for summer camp for some student here in Guthrie. And this is part of what this museum is about. This is your museum. It's an Oklahoma museum. But it's about having a positive influence on young people. And we've tried to do that. Some of you may not realize how long we have been here, but this year we are celebrating our 20th year of being open. 23 years of being a nonprofit organization. Before I call Chuck up here to introduce and talk about the authors of our book, I want to show you this book because this book is also, Bob Burke is the co-author of this book, and this is probably the best book on Oklahoma baseball that there is. There's more in this book about Oklahoma baseball than any book that I've seen, and we use it here as a reference many times. And so I want to give Bob the credit for this book too. He's written a lot of other books too. Before I'm through here and Chuck, I want to recognize Clinton Thomas too. He's been another one in Oklahoma that's been a foundation for FCA, and he's more than just an old coach. He's an All-American, and but he's kind of like Don Demeter. When Don Demeter was inducted in the Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, and I was talking to his grandkids, I said, Don and Clinton is just like him. Was a great athlete and a great player, but he's a better man than he was a football player, baseball player. And both those men.
Tell my wife that.
I would. She's here. You can tell her I said that. A friend of mine for a long time, one of the foundation men of FCA, Chuck Bowman, come forward and talk about Marshall, and then we'll have him come forward. Then we'll have a presentation for Marshall.
Thank you, Richard, for inviting me to be introducer to Marshall. I think there is a copy of this book at each table, and if you have one, or if there is one there, I'd like for you to take it right now. I want to point something out to you, and it would help if you had one in your hand. But before I make these remarks, I'd just like to thank Richard for doing this. Last year we were here at this time, and we acknowledged a man by the name of Ed Frost, who had written a book on Port Robertson, one of Clinton and my coaches when we were at the University of Oklahoma. And it was a very, very good time. It was well done, and Richard just has done the same thing today, and I'm glad you're here. We have been part of Richard's museum here as far as a person that admired what he's put together here. I don't know if there's another place in America that has such a variety of great collection of things that people who love sports can come and see. I just wish it were on down in Bricktown, where 1,000 people can come in and see it every day, because it deserves that type of thing. But
Town in New York City.
that'd be all right too. Anyway, to introduce Marshall to you, I'm not going to read all the things that we have in front of you there, because you can read, and I just want to make it a little more personal than that. When Betty and I came to kind of give FCA a jump start here in Oklahoma, we really didn't know where this was going. This was in 1973. Clinton and I were fortunate to be part of the very first national FCA conference at Estes Park, Colorado, in August of 1956. We were both juniors at the University of Oklahoma at that time, and Coach Wilkinson encouraged our football team, as many of it were interested, to go to this national meeting of FCA. Coach Wilkinson had invited, with Port Robertson, Otto Graham, Duke Walker, and Pepper Martin to come to our football dorm in the spring of 1956 and share this ministry, or this, they called it a movement back then. It wasn't called a ministry so much. But it was Don McClannon's dream that if coaches and athletes could sell pantyhose and cigarettes and all the stuff coaches sell, why could not they promote the life of Christ and the Christian walk? So Coach Wilkinson was very open to that, and we sat there and listened to those three men share their testimonies. Each one of them shared about 20 minutes, and it was an eye-opening thing for all of us that someone would be encouraged to be bold about their Christian witness. And but it was through that influence that Clint and I and Bill Kreischer, and there were 9 of us all together, were encouraged to go to Estes Park. And none of us know what the end road would be there. Here, 60 some odd years later, we're still involved. And that's really been a great thing for us. But when we came to Oklahoma City, or we wanted to find a place that was central of the state, we felt like Edmond would be it. I really first wanted to take our office to Norman, where the University of Oklahoma was, and where the very first national office was established in the early 50s, 1954. But I thought, the people at Oklahoma State probably wouldn't receive that very well. And so we decided to strike a happy medium, and we ended up in Edmond. 16,000 people lived in Edmond at that time. Now, University of Central Oklahoma is over 16,000. But at any rate, over the years, and it was because of Jim Daniel, and Jim is here this afternoon, it was because of his encouragement to me that we would get a board together, get some men together that would give us direction that we could answer to, and he headed that group up in the very early stages. In fact, I accepted the job in his bank, Friendly National Bank, South Oklahoma City. I accepted the job in that building, not knowing what in the world we were doing. And I think that was kind of God's thing, really. I mean, I had no idea what was going to happen from that day forward. There was absolutely no money set aside to get this thing going, and it was just really a step out in faith for us. But I have my wife to thank for saying, okay, let's do it. I mean, we were in Dallas, we were living pretty well in Dallas, and for Bill Kreischer to come and tell me that, you need to do this. When I first broke that news to Betty, her first reaction was, I think you ought to do it. And seriously, there was absolutely no path laid. It was going to be a real pioneering thing. But one of the people that we met along the way was Marshall Snipes. And he was enthusiastic. He was on fire for what we were about to do. He had been in an FCA huddle in Gary Lauer's high school huddle at the U.S. Grant High School. He had that athletic fire in his belly still, and he wanted to be part. And lo and behold, he became more of a part than we ever dreamed to be. We kept his wheels moving pretty fast. In fact, he became a member of the National Board of Trustees in the FCA and a personal counsel to Tom Landry. And he may want to tell that story. But it was an eye-opening thing for all of us, and such a blessing. It has been. I have admired Marshall's family, especially his father. His father is more more popular or more famous than Marshall, and you may want to speak to that too. But at any rate, it has been a joy for me and joy for Betty. Perhaps he kept us out of jail a couple of times. Seriously. We had an IRS guy come into our office one day, and I think he was going to set up shop there for a year. And we were just, we were doing what we were told to do, but he was an Iranian guy. and he started picking us apart, and all of a sudden we found out it's penitentiary time for the FCA directors because we were doing some things that he didn't like. But they weren't out of bounds, or they weren't against the law. It was just something he didn't think we should be doing. But anyway, Marshall, why don't you come and tell us your story? And let's welcome Marshall. Congratulations.
Thanks, Chuck. Well, it's an honor to be here. I had no idea that this museum was here, other than having driven by it a couple of times, but I had no idea what was inside. This is a pretty amazing place, as you all probably all know. The FCA story is really an interesting story. And it all started in Oklahoma, and that's really what makes this story unique to us and why we decided to do the book. But when we first got the idea for the book, it was because the story hadn't been properly told, in my opinion. So Bob Burke's a good friend of mine. You probably all know Bob. He couldn't be here. He's in court today. But Bob and I had done another book previously, and so I approached Bob and said, how would you like to do another book? And Bob's written over 100 books, as you saw one here earlier, and he was very enthusiastic and ecstatic about it. Now, if you don't know who Bob Burke is, Bob's about this tall. His claim to fame was he was a fourth team lineman for Broken Bow High School as a senior, and the coach came to him and said, I think you need another profession. So he became a sports announcer as a high school senior for his high school football team. Now that was Bob's connection to sports. Now carry that on through. He became he graduated with a journalism degree from OU, got into broadcasting, and ended up working for ABC and was Chris Schenkel's play-by-play man. Now, back then, in those days, the play-by-play and the color guy were it was reversed. The roles were reversed from what you see on TV today. So Bob Burke is doing the play-by-play. Well, most people don't realize that because I'm not even sure his name was ever even mentioned very often because all you saw was Chris Schenkel. So they were fortunate enough to call the Doug Flutie Hail Mary game. And Bob was actually the play-by-play person in that game. So when you hear him going crazy, that was Bob Burke. Well, anyway, Bob said to apologize to all of you for not being able to be here, but he lives here in Oklahoma City and is a lawyer. And then actually, he's in my wife's courtroom today. So I didn't have enough influence to get him out of that today. But at any rate, Bob does wanted me to apologize for his absence today. But really, FCA, and when I think back on why we wrote the book, it's because the story needed not just to be told, but it needed to be preserved. Because it is a great story, and it did start in Oklahoma. As Chuck mentioned, Don McClanahan, the founder, happened to pass away this past week, and so we're all cognizant of that. But he really was the beginning, and I think the message, at least to me, is that he was one guy, an assistant coach at OSU, I think a graduate assistant coach, not even a full coach, but he had an idea, and it really does speak to me that one person can make a difference. If you have a good idea and you trust God for those results, that's what's going to happen. And so from those early beginnings, today, FCA is in 47 countries. There are 12,758 huddle groups. That's the high school, college, and junior high groups that meet weekly. Over 86,000 people went to camp last year, and over 2 million kids participated in FCA nationally. And that came from the beginnings in Oklahoma. So it's a great Oklahoma story. Now, in Oklahoma itself, when Chuck and Betty first came back in 1973 and they met, and in fact, I feel like I'm preaching to the book here. Half the people here are in the book, but when in 1973, the first budget that Jim helped put together was $30,000, which was basically mainly to pay Chuck and Betty to come and be on the staff. Everything else had to be donated, or they had to try to raise more than $30,000. Today, the budget's $1.8 million. So that gives you an idea of how it's grown from the beginnings from Chuck and Betty's time up until today. And there's some wonderful statistics about Oklahoma. Let me just share with you quickly. But there are 495 huddle groups in Oklahoma. How many high schools are there, John? 500 or so, and 15 or 20 colleges. So it's almost in every school in Oklahoma today. That's really an amazing statistic. There were 2,800 kids that went to camp in Oklahoma from Oklahoma schools, several different locations, and I could go on and on. But it truly is a great success story, and it all started in Oklahoma. So, who were some of the people that in those early days really made this happen? And I'm not going to mention a lot of names. There's over 600 names in the book. I felt like I interviewed all 600 of them, and John was with me on half of those. And the stories were just endless from what's come out of FCA over the years, and the influence FCA's had not just on the youth as they come through the programs, but on their parents and on the adult chapters and on people like the ones here in this room today who continue to have that kind of influence. But if you think about FCA in those early days, it was Chuck and Betty and a small budget, and they had to rely on some help, some people to help them. People like Coach Lauer here, who was my high school huddle leader, and I can't remember how long ago that was, Coach, but it was a long time ago. And Coach would take us down to OU to hear the speakers and to have the meetings every week, and just like the same programs they do today. It was all started back then. But the interesting thing was FCA was always, especially in Oklahoma, had the ability to attract well-known athletes who were successful in their own right, who gave credibility to the ministry. And of course, Clendon being at the forefront of that, one of my heroes when I was growing up, he was the big star at OU, of course, and there were many others along the way. Then when Chuck first came, Steve Owens got on board early. Of course, anytime you got a Heisman Trophy winner that's helping you, that obviously helps you get started. But there were many others, Steve Largent, J.C. Watts, Coach Odell was mentioned earlier, John's father. On the national level, we had some big names also, not just some of the names you heard earlier, but at that time, Tom Landry, Tom Osborne, Roger Staubach, some really big name football players really stepped up into the forefront, and somewhere along the way, Tom Landry became the chairman of the national board. I know Clendon served on the national board before I did, but it really made it a little easier to attract, especially donors, and it made it a little easier to attract coaches. Because I'm going to get to coaches in a minute, the backbone of the ministry and who the book is dedicated to. But that was really important all the way through today's time. And I can't tell you, some of the staff guys back here can probably tell you better than I, but the big name players that have come through OU and OSU, particularly OU in the early days, with the J.C. Watts and the Steve Davises and the John Roushes and those guys. And there were plenty of OSU guys too along the way. And that's kind of built to the point that I guess it was 2 summers ago, John, when J.W. and Trevor Knight were on the circuit for FCA.
Yeah.
So you had the 2 quarterbacks from the 2 schools, big schools in Oklahoma anyway, that were FCA guys. And then you could go to Tulsa University, and their coach was a former FCA at the time staff member, Bill Blankenship. So there have been a lot of stories, thousands and thousands of stories. The hard part about doing the book was trying to condense all that into 200 pages with pictures. Bob keeps telling me we got to keep this thing short because people won't read it, and we've got to have more pictures than words or people will get bored. So if you do nothing but read the captions to the pictures, you'll get the idea of what the book's all about. But it is a wonderful story, and it is about some really important people that came along the way. But I want to take just a minute, though, and tell you about why I think FCA works. And most of these guys here could tell you the same story, but it's the coaches. If you look at any other ministry, they have to put large numbers of people on their staff and raise enormous amounts of money in order to staff their ministries. But FCA doesn't have to do that because we've got the coaches. So in every one of these 495 campuses that we're on in Oklahoma, there are 495, and probably more than that, coaches who are involved. The coaches who run the huddle meetings, who organize things, who keep the ministry going and keep the excitement going. I know when I was in high school and playing sports, coaches were like gods. And both the popular coach, like Gary Lauer, who was the most popular coach in our school, was running the FCA group. Well, it was kind of easy to think maybe I ought to at least go to a meeting and see what's going on. And that really is the cornerstone, and that's why the book's dedicated to the coaches. So when you see the FCA ministry, it's not just the big name guys like Clinton or the staff guys like Chuck and John. It really is those coaches that make this ministry work. So it didn't really take a lot of thinking when John and I were working on the book to decide to dedicate the book to the coaches, because that really is what makes the ministry work. Now, I just want to say a couple of things about the book itself, and then if you'll have questions, I'd be happy to take questions. But anytime you write a book, there's a tremendous amount of research that has to take place so that your stories are accurate, they're documented. You don't want to be the person that writes something that somebody else comes back later and says, no, that really didn't happen, or that really didn't work, especially a book about a ministry. I just felt like, boy, we really had to research this thing properly. This book would not have been written had it not been for Chuck and Betty starting in 1973, and there's a picture of the first one in the book of the newsletters that they published that went to the donors and to the coaches to keep the ministry in the forefront of everybody's mind, and really kind of held you accountable too, I think, a little bit, Coach, because each month you had the pressure of putting that out, and that meant you had to show some results each month. I don't know if that's what you thought at the time, but the end result of that is we had the first 20 years of history of FCA really was written as it occurred. It wasn't based on somebody's memory, which I'll get to that in a minute, but it was based on these wonderful newsletters that were mimeographed. I don't know how you publish those things, but they were well received at the time. And I know the very first one, it explains why you decided to do the newsletters. But the point is that without those newsletters, this book wouldn't exist. It just would not have existed, because not only did it give me a roadmap to tell the real story, it gave me a lot of names, and it gave me a lot of ideas and people to go talk to. So I don't know, we lost track of how many people we interviewed in this process, but it was a lot. And the only unfortunate thing is that I couldn't put all the stories in here. The book would have been way too long, way too big, and I'm sure I just scratched the surface of all of the interesting stories of things that happened and people whose lives were touched, who later turned that either into a ministry in and of itself or became successful in some other endeavor. So the newsletters are really important. The funny thing that happened along the way is that more than once I would interview a second or third person about a specific event. It's amazing how people remember things differently. So that became a challenge, trying to tell a story that I thought was important enough to be in the book, but tell it in a way that both sides of whoever was telling me the story would not be offended. So there's a lot. So I took some editorial license about some of it, but at the end of the day, I think that you really do get a good feel for what the ministry's about and who some of the key players were. You know, and there's just two things I want to point out in kind of closing here. In the process, and I told John this along the way, it would have a bigger impact on me and on John and on Bob than it would on anybody that's in the book or anybody that the book's written about or would read the book, because it really did serve to kind of reinvigorate the whole reason that FCA exists. And I know John would tell you the same thing, and we had that conversation many times, but there's two quotes that I want to refer to both of them are in the book, but both of them had a big impact on me. Now, I've got a political background, so changing things, whether it's ministry or whether it's government or whatever it is, change is a difficult concept to get your arms around, and how do you affect change? So John and I were over in Tulsa one day, and we'd interviewed Coach Blankenship at TU, and we'd interviewed John Raps that morning, who was the first staff person that Chuck and Betty hired. And we ended the day in Gene Barrett's office. Now, some of you here may not know the name Gene Barrett, but Gene was a Tulsa University football player, played in the NFL for the 49ers, and was a pretty good 8 or 9 year player. And so he had been involved in, not in FCA, but another Christian athletic group that was kind of floundering around a little bit. Chuck talked him into merging in with FCA in the early 70s, and that story's in the book too. And so we're interviewing Gene about that, and I said, so you're still on the board, by the way. Not only were you involved in FCA early, but you're still involved today. Why is that? Why are you involved in FCA? Which, by the way, is a story I ask every single person I interview. But his quote and then one from J.C. Watts were the two that stuck out in my mind the most. And he said, I really believe in FCA because it's all about one kid at a time. And if you think about the role of a coach, and if you think about one kid at a time, it really does come clearer to me, at least it did to me at the time, of what the ministry really is all about. It's not about large numbers. It's really about one kid at a time. And that really has stuck with me for a couple of years now since Gene told John and I that day in Tulsa. The second quote that I think is really instructive because it goes back to the influence part of FCA's tradition and history. And that's when J.C. Watts, and it's in his introduction here in the book, when he says, you know, FCA gave me a picture of what life is supposed to be like. And even though he grew up in a Christian home, he really didn't have a picture of what life was really supposed to be like until he got involved with FCA. And I think of Jerry Brown and all the meetings at the truck stop and Coach Lauer's involvement with JC and really Clinton flying down and picking him up when he was a college, even before he was the starting quarterback, and taking him all over the state to speak. And we all know the history of that. JC, wonderful speaker, and I guess you all saw is now the head of Feed the Children. So obviously his life was impacted and turned around at a time when it could have gone a different direction. And he's the first one that would tell you that, and I'm just repeating his words. But it really, what life is supposed to look like, that really kind of put it down on human terms for a kid that was a football player at OU that was trying to decide whether to quit the team or not at the time that all happened. And he tells a great story about how he went into Coach Switzer's office and told him he was going to quit. And Switzer basically said, I'm not going to let you quit. And he went back and through his FCA group at OU, kind of got reinvigorated, and of course the rest is history. But FCA's played a role in a lot of people's lives that you may or may not realize in this state, and that's just two examples of it. So at any rate, it was a lot of fun doing the book. I did learn a lot, even though I thought I knew a lot about the history because I've lived most of it. But I learned a lot, and I'm more appreciative of the ministry today than I was when I started this project. And I was already pretty high on it. So, anyway, I'd be happy to answer questions.
I got one.
Yes.
Any big surprises or anything as you researched?
The sheer numbers of big name athletes at OSU and OU and other places as well that were involved in FCA that I didn't know. Matt Holliday.
Yeah.
That whole Matt Holliday thing. I had no idea that Matt Holliday. Rashawn Woods. I'm picking on OSU because that's where I went. But it's the same thing at OU. Just the fellow that played center this past year, Ty Darlington. Guys like that I had no idea were involved, and unless you are directly involved, you would not necessarily know that. But I think that was, John, that was the biggest surprise. I think just the sheer numbers of big name athletes that were willing to take a stand. And it's stories that are, a lot of them got left out of here just because there wasn't enough room, but that would probably be the biggest surprise. I lost a little bit of track of the details of what was going on in FCA at that level, when earlier in my life I'd been more involved on that side of it. But no, it's a great question. Yes, sir.
Two more things that I think that has made FCA what it is today, and 60 years old, is that these guys, including you, have kept it Christ-centered and church-focused.
Yeah.
It has not become a church for kids.
Right.
They have focused and funneled kids through the FCA into the church, and all denominations, not just Baptist. But I really think that's been the key to the success, or two things that have been the key besides the things you mentioned.
Well, I think that's real important. Yeah, that's obviously real important. Yes, sir. Clinton's answering your question.
One brilliant move was he adopted Harold Keith and Bud Wilkinson's newsletter, which you referred to. And he used that. Coach would always keep everybody informed as to what we were doing, why we were doing it. And Chuck picked up on that. If you ever watched or read the FCA newsletter, it was almost a duplicate, thanks to Betty, of the Bud Wilkinson newsletter. Told him we needed money, we needed a car to travel, we needed more staff. He had all of his needs down, and we were informed.
Yeah, that's a great point, Clinton. Probably more important than having published all those newsletters, we still have them. They were still, every single one of them is still there. Now, we put plastic on them now and we're trying to preserve them, but we've got them. And then after you all quit doing it, it changed, and Kevin came along and changed, but so it's not like it was back then, but times have changed too. There's different needs and different reasons we do those things, but yeah, that history was already written. It was, all I had to do was compile it.
Those, the way those were written was by our staff, actually. They had a deadline to get some material to us. And I was usually the one to remind them. And I'd call John, I'd call all, and they didn't even like to pick up the phone. Because they knew what I.
So you guys don't have to do that now, see? That's true. The newsletters, for those of you that never saw one or don't know, they were 4 to 8 pages long, and each of the regional staff guys had a section that would tell what was going on in their area of the state. And that's where I got a lot of the names from around the state. Now, a lot of them were familiar names to me, but a lot of them weren't. And of course, as you would expect, a lot of them from that era are no longer living, so we weren't able to interview them, but we were able to interview some of their kids even. So that was a real important part of that history as well. And it was incredible. Most of the former, well, all of the former staff people that we were able to interview, which was a lot of them, all had good memories, all had stories, all had things that, of course, you would not have necessarily heard about, but some of them were funny and some of them didn't make it in the book.
Those staff members being key too.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a coach, I benefited from some of those staff members, and they had great staff members.
Great staff.
Over the years, it was great.
Well, that's what good coaches do, right? They put together good staff. Yes, sir.
Spiritually speaking, many lives have been changed. Anything in particular stand out about lives that were changed for Christ? Any special person that you saw in your research or anything that really stood out to you?
Yeah, I'm gonna take you to page 165. I'm glad you asked that. There's several stories in here that I would refer you to. The Nate Fleming story, the Brett Spell story, and the Jeff Goodwill story. Those 3 stories really answer your question.
Thank you.
It's incredible the depth of spiritual knowledge and that some of these young guys and gals were able to reach the level they were able to reach at a young age because of the FCA influence. And I know I started to mention Nate Fleming earlier, but if you had to pick one person out of all the FCA kids in the history of FCA, it would be Nate Fleming would be the poster child. And unfortunately, he was in the Oklahoma State plane crash, as you all know, and that did not end as we think of as well. But maybe that's what was supposed to happen, because his legacy lives on through FCA. And his family was very supportive. John interviewed his dad for the book, and that's where we got the pictures and some of the stories. But we also interviewed Nate's coaches, and back to the coach influence again. And those coaches were influential on these kids, and then these kids were equally influential on those coaches. That's another side of this that is really important. But I would say those kids that didn't make it, simply because all their stories are pretty remarkable, pretty emotional when you're talking to those families and doing the interviews. So John did those interviews. Yes, sir.
I've got a question. Moving forward, we were talking about the staff stories and the newsletters, because the current staff, we kind of do that on our own now and send it out. What's a way, let's say 40 years from now, I don't know if you'd even be up for it, but writing the 100-year book.
Let's hope so.
But what's a way and a method that the current staff can kind of track of those newsletters in preparation for somebody who would be willing to write the 100-year anniversary book? What's a method?
That's a great question. In fact, I was going to tell Richard this earlier before the meeting started. History is, you got to save things, you got to keep things, because our memories aren't as good as we think they are, especially as we get older. And if you look back 60 years of memories like this book was, if it had not been written down, this book wouldn't be here. So my message to you would be the same way with this place is, I don't think you have to be told to keep things, but records, minutes of meetings, any kind of thing that would help somebody in the future to really understand and know what happened. And I think that's a great point. I know that if you're an FCA staff person in a smaller town, that might be a little easier, because there's kind of a little more continuity in the adult groups in some of these towns, as say to Oklahoma City or someplace bigger. But I would say make sure that you keep things and make sure you write it down and make sure you're intentional about preservation of those events and people and places, because it's really about the people.
Marshall?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to add to that a little bit. During our period of time, FCA was just for guys. Just for guys. And along comes the idea, why don't we include girls? Why don't the lady athletes get involved? So we kind of wrote that up. That has some certain dates to it. We can point back to those dates. Hey, this is about the time that women started getting involved in FCA. And then we truck on a little further along, and they say, why do you have to be an athlete to be an FCA? And see, that turned a whole new page. And we'd look at ourselves and say, well, this ministry is for coaches and athletes. And knowingly, why not include that non-athlete? So the band guy comes, the drama people come. Now we're out there for anyone and everybody. And those particular periods of time need to be documented. And that's what you're asking. The significant times of change need to be identified and documented. That really helps them.
One final thought, JT, pictures. Take them and keep them. That was really critical to this. And some of these pictures that are in here had to actually be restored. That they can do amazing things these days with technology, but pictures, can take a lot of them and keep them. And those are really important because that identifies what happened.
One more illustration of your question. Clinton and his wife Sonny, Ben and I were in church Sunday, and we went out to dinner, to lunch. We went out to Jimmy's Egg for lunch, and I'm standing in line, and quite a few others are standing in line. A man walks up to me and taps me on the shoulder, and he asked me if I weren't the FCA guy. And of course, be honest with you people, this guy right here was as important to FCA as I ever was, every bit as important. And I'd never like to see that slide, because if it hadn't been for Clinton, I guarantee you a lot of these things would never have happened. But every now and then, and sometimes quite often, I'm out in the public someplace, and some guy comes up to me, taps me on the shoulder. "Aren't you Coach Bowman that led FCA? I accepted Christ at an FCA thing." Man, that makes my day. That kind of fulfills the deal. And so I want you to know that there's no telling how many thousands of kids over the last 60 years have come to know Christ through this ministry. And that's why I think the Lord's still blessing it, We made a pledge not to be at church. We're not going to take places of your church. We want you to go to your church. And I think that one commitment from the very beginning was held throughout all time. And that's why 60 years have gone by pretty fast.
Well, thank you all.
We're going to present something with Marshall here in just a minute. But a prime example is the testimony of Coach Monty Williams that came out this past week after the loss. A physical loss, but she's not lost. He said that. But that's an example of what the testimony can do. That is spread all over the country. And that just unbelievable testimony of a coach who was a former athlete of not letting something get him down. He said, God's going to work it out. You got to make it work. And so that's what FCA has been about. And when we're through, there's some old FCA things here if somebody want to look at. But Jack, come up. Jack's our president of our board. And if you're on our board, hold up your hand. I want those people recognized too while we're here. We appreciate what our board does. And we just want to make a little presentation to you for what you've done. This just says Territorial Capital Sports Museum honors Marshall Stipes and Bob Bird for their authorship of the book Oklahoma Fellowship of Christian Athletes, 60 Years of Influence, an outstanding contribution to Oklahoma sports history. February 23rd, 2016.
Thank you very much.
I also want to say that Bob Burke did send me a letter thanking us for honoring him and making he was sorry he could not be here today, but he also enclosed a check for $500. So, we appreciate your support in any way that you want to be, because this thing just operates on what people want to do for it to keep it going. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.